Today on the Critical Mass podcast, we're discussing the ADOS Advocacy Foundation's Reparations Framework. Stick around, this is a conversation that matters. On Juneteenth, we mark the end of slavery and we commemorate the word of freedom getting to the last of the enslaved in Galveston, Texas. While we celebrate that freedom, we must also acknowledge that Juneteenth is the beginning of a broken promise, the promise of America. While June 19th, 1865 brought word of freedom, we know that freedom without redress is not freedom at all. Freedom without land, freedom without capital, freedom without restitution. From 1776 to 1865, the United States government sanctioned the inhumane institution of chattel slavery, allowing millions of our people to be trafficked, bred, sold, raped, tortured, and worked to death for nearly 90 years in service of building a new nation. That same government failed to deliver justice during Reconstruction. The promise of 40 acres revoked. Protection for the newly freed abandoned. Instead, our ancestors, who had already toiled unpaid for generations, were plunged into another century of terror, lynchings, massacres, land theft, medical experimentation, convict leasing, exclusion from land grants. And these were not isolated events, they were federal failures. And who did these federal failures happen to? They happened to the American descendants of slavery. Reparations must be lineage-based because the injuries were and are specific. The unique economic disadvantage created by slavery did not just up and vanish. It was passed down, just like the property would have been passed down if we were allowed to own any. And if it continues today, how does it continue? It continues in the form of the racial wealth gap, intergenerational poverty, and the absence of inherited capital in Black families tied to U.S. chattel slavery. This is about justice for a particular group of people, not a broad category of race. Just as other aggrieved groups have received targeted redress, whether you're talking about our Japanese Americans for internment or Holocaust survivors, the American descendants of slavery must receive the same direct compensation and material repair. And who is that from? Directly from the US government. We've heard those excuses. It was long ago. Nobody alive owned slaves. But governments do not escape the responsibility just because time has passed. They have to pay their debts. They have to pay them with interest. And this is a debt that's long overdue. Today on the Critical Mass podcast, we are discussing reparations, specifically the framework for reparations designed by the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. For those of you that may remember, in October of 2024, the ADOS Advocacy Foundation hosted the National Reparations Summit in New Orleans, Louisiana. And at that summit, they previewed their reparations framework and they announced the Justice for Generations campaign, which was a campaign to go with writing and getting a national ADOS reparations bill. And if we're talking about reparations, there's a particular name that we have to mention, and that's none other than Yvette Carnell. Yvette Carnell, founder and president of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. For those of you that may remember, she also was featured in the very first episode of the Critical Mass podcast. So I'd like to welcome Yvette Carnell up to the stage. How are you doing, YC?
I'm doing good, Simeon. How are you?
I'm doing good. You heard me trying to read through all of that.
You did a great job. Great job.
Working through it. It was a lot to read, but if I know anything, it's about making the case to reparations. and I'd love to just give you your flowers in the moment, because when we talk about the modern reparations movement, there's no way to talk about it with out talking about you, because you created the foundation, the machine that is being used to push this movement forward. Um, with us today, we also have another wonderful volunteer with the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, because all members of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation are volunteers. All members of the HQ portion of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, that's all volunteers. And so one of the volunteers that we have with us today is named Aisha Muhammed. She has a beautiful, beautiful bio here. I'm going to read most of it. Some of it we're going to talk through. So bear with me here. Aisha Muhammad holds a bachelor's degree in history with a concentration in African American studies, a passion that was ignited by the stories of her grandparents, all born in the Jim Crow South and raised as sharecroppers. Their lived experience left a huge mark on Aisha, fueling a lifelong commitment to understanding the history of American descendants of slavery, their critical role in building the nation, and the persistent exclusion from its prosperity. She further pursued a master's degree in public health, focusing on healthcare policy and administration. During her graduate studies and subsequent HIV prevention work in Harlem, New York, Aisha gained firsthand insight into how race and lineage profoundly affect health outcomes and resource access, often with life or death consequences. Her career in shelter services, working with women facing mental illness and addiction, as well as men in general population shelters, deepened her understanding of the systemic barriers trapping, people in cycles of poverty. These experiences underscored for Aisha that lasting change demands transformational policies that address root causes, not incremental fixes. Driven by this conviction, Aisha advocates for targeted policies that recognize the unique history and current realities of ADOS people, aiming to finally align their social and economic status with their foundational contributions to America's greatness. With a strong commitment to public impact, Aisha works at the intersection of analysis and strategy, helping shape thoughtful policy solutions. Her career is centered on research-driven approaches that support informed decision-making in dynamic settings. When not advancing ADOS advocacy or pursuing her professional work, Aisha enjoys family time, photography, and exploring her passion for history through travel. Let's give a warm Critical Mass podcast welcome to Aisha Muhammad. Aisha, how's it
Hello.
going? Hey, hey.
I'm good. How y'all doing?
We are
Good.
doing
Good to see
well.
both of you.
Good to see you. So I want to just throw something out here. I only read part of your bio because the other part of it really spoke to the work you've done with the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And I kind of want to talk through some of that now. I've had the opportunity to work with Aisha and volunteer alongside Aisha for several years now, since 2021. And my first interaction with you, Aisha, was you on the policy team. And so I'll tell you a story that I haven't told anyone yet. Okay. I'll tell you a story I hadn't told anyone yet. Okay. So, for those that are really in the know, before the foundation all the way came about, we were in this group that had a chat and had the ability to post. And me and a few other people were like, hey, yeah, they're going to need some policy. We were in the policy team in the group chat. Okay. And so we're talking and we worked on a few things, but nothing really organized. It was real laissez-faire. It was just, hey, we're here, we're going to work on some stuff. And then we get to a formal meeting. And I was thinking to myself, like, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to see what I can do with this policy team, right? And then Aisha showed up on camera and she had a full presentation, okay? No, okay. So she had a full presentation about like, hey, here goes what we're going to work on. Here goes the timelines. Here goes why it's important. And immediately I thought to myself, well, I'm going to sit down and shut up. Okay. Because what was obvious to me in that moment was that the right person had arrived to lead this particular initiative. And
And
so
what happened after that, Simeon? What did I say? I said Aisha's the policy team lead.
that's how I went to, right? Like,
It wasn't a question. It wasn't a question. Right?
There was no question. It was like, and I'll introduce you to the policy team lead. And I was like, okay, this is great, right? Well, next thing you know, we were fully enthralled in working on a Black agenda. And I watched you lead a team of volunteers to create a 12 section Black agenda, ranging from agriculture to cannabis to business to you name it. And I watched your leadership not just build a team, but motivate a team to work and put together a hell of a product. I got to see that same level of leadership again as we started talking about priorities of the foundation. And for those who are internal, you know that we have a strategic plan that goes years out. And I got to see you lead that effort and say, hey, we need to put down our priorities and we need to be held accountable to them. So I got to watch you lead a team to do that. While in policy, I sat there and got to watch you lead the team in speaking through this reparations framework that we are going to talk through today. So I just have so much respect for your leadership and your ability to make teams have great products and put out great work. And so big shout out to you. You helped us do a commercial with the foundation.
The good old days.
The good old days.
You
You also created a worksheet and training series on localizing the Black agenda. And currently you're sitting and having a bunch of conversations trying to advance our legislative initiatives for a reparations bill. And so I can't say it enough how just honored I am to be working with you and volunteering with you in the work that you've done for the foundation. So y'all give another round of applause for Aisha Muhammed.
Hey, give Aisha her flowers. I forgot she did all
that. 4 years. It's been 4 years. I
Mm.
appreciate that, Simeon. I do. We have definitely, all of us, 3 of us for sure, but with other people as well. We've been through the trenches of getting this organization going. It wasn't just me. There's a lot of folks involved, but I appreciate the shout out and the recognition. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yvette, you know, you were on episode 1. We talked about why you wanted to create a foundation and how we got to this moment. But how does it feel like right now as we're about to unveil what I consider to be a huge deliverable for the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, which is a comprehensive reparations framework? What is that like for you a few years down the line now, or from a few years of all of the work that we've seen?
Well, I feel like for me, we finally gotten serious, right? Because it's one thing to have this kind of cathartic moment where you're like, we deserve the debt. The debt is owed. The debt must be paid. Yeah, that's great. And that's true. That is absolutely true. But when people come and ask you, what does that look like? Okay, a debt has to be paid to the descendants of the enslaved. They have suffered. You've made a case. What does that look like? When you start talking about what that looked like, you get into the serious part of policy. We get into the serious part of like, okay, what is it like in terms of payouts, regulation, who gets it? These are questions that have been asked for decades on decades on decades. And I feel like in terms of this organization that we've finally gotten to the point that we're asking the questions that will take us to the Supreme Court. Those are the questions that we're asking. They have asked, really, we've answered those, and they're going to litigate that. But we have finally, as a group of trailblazers and volunteers, answered the question that is going to lead us to reparations through way of the court. That's what I feel like. So it's a relief for me, honestly, to get to that point to where we can actually answer the question that people who agree with us, because it's common sense really, are asking, which is, okay, you got me. Now, how do we do it? We're answering the how do we do it. That's
Mm,
phenomenal.
mm. I totally agree. And I also, one of the big things that I think detractors do is they're like, well, what does it look like? And then they look into the void because most people and organizations haven't taken the time to put out what it should look like. Um, Aisha, I want to read. So I've been blessed with an advanced copy, so I'm not going to act like it's all
Blessings on
memory, because it is a very comprehensive document. So I want to read something about the development of the ADOS Reparations Framework. And then Aisha, I'd love for you to kind of take us through what that looked like in terms of the development and those conversations. So
Sure.
the development of the American Descendants of Slavery Reparations Framework began 4 years ago. Following the publication of the ADOS Advocacy Foundation's National Black Agenda, the policy team shifted its focus to designing a comprehensive federal reparations plan. This effort involved extensive literature reviews, historical and legal analysis, and the collection of data to support the framework. The team examined both domestic and international reparations programs, assessed the specific harms inflicted upon the enslaved and their descendants in the United States, and explored a range of debt calculation methodologies. The result was a formulation of a multi-phase reparations strategy designed to address the cumulative impact of centuries of state-sanctioned harm. Uh, what was it like putting this agenda together, or putting this framework together, and around how many people were involved?
Thank you, Simeon, for the question. So, to your earlier point, after we finished the Black Agenda, it was a huge undertaking. Let me just say that for people who don't know, it was a lot of work, and it was months and months and months of work, and we did it twice. A lot of people don't know that. It was written, I want to say we probably finished the first one in June of 2020, and then we went right back and started to do a rewrite in October of 2020. So once we finished that product, everybody was tired, myself included. and so for a while we were sort of like, figuring out what's next for us in terms of projects. So we didn't automatically go right into doing the framework. If you remember, Simeon and Yvette, you were there as well. We started working on other projects. We were doing legislative reviews. We had all kinds of spreadsheets going on and trying to figure out what's Congress doing, what bills are being passed. Do we like the bill? Do we not like the bill? Should we just, put forth an amendment to a certain bill just to make it better, or outright oppose that bill? And we also developed a program where we will do some consulting for folks who are interested in getting involved in politics, to help them do some candidate consulting work, which was great work we did for folks. And all the while, in the back of my mind, I'm like, we have to get to that framework. We have to get to that framework.
Yeah.
So, but I understood the undertaking that was going to be. And I understood the amount of work that was going to have to go into that. So I myself was avoiding it just a little bit, trying to stretch it out just a little bit. Let's get these other little projects done. And then we can come back and figure out, what does this ADOS reparations framework look like, right? So, so come around 2021, I'm like, all right, guys, gotta buckle up again. Gotta buckle up and get back to the work of this organization. And we're really what we're here for. Everything else was a great addition, additive, but we are a reparations organization. So where would we be without actually at least attempting to put forth a framework for what reparations should look like? It's easy to say other people, have fallen short, they haven't done it, or what they have put forth is bad or isn't comprehensive enough, but it's not, you can't stop there. That's not enough. So we went back to the drawing board, got another spreadsheet out, and literally it just started off by, I asked the folks in the room, and it was at that time probably about 10 of us, I think. And I asked simply, what needs to go in here? Like, what needs to be in here? How should this be? I'm always thinking of systems and processes and structure. That's where I come in. So I understood that we have to get a process down that makes sense, a process that can actually be done on a federal level, And so my first thought was that we have to figure out what are sort of our fundamentals of what a reparations framework should look like. So then I came up with five five essentials of repair, which I know you'll get to soon. But that was sort of the first part, figuring out like sort of what are our guiding posts to help us sort of do that research, to help sort of like make us go forth. Obviously, we found research that, you know, helped us, you know, I guess, change it up a little bit. We were flexible to do that, but we needed a guiding post to start out. So one of the first things I thought of was like, we have to have an administrative component. That's huge. We have to figure out, how does this actually work in real life? And the only entity that can like implement this in real life is the federal government, right? And the federal government, although people, you know, try to poo-poo the federal government does great work. It has great people there, and they understand how to put systems together, how to implement systems. And so I felt that that would be the main first part, was having an administrative function. And through that, and I know we're going to get to it in a bit, was we thought having a Department of ADOS affairs.
You have to have like the fundamentals to even qualify what a plan should be.
Okay.
And so like when I hear the fundamentals, identifying the harm suffered, defining eligibility criteria, funding a comprehensive repair initiative, and having a robust set of legislative protections and oversight to prevent abuse. And so was that, were you working from that perspective of saying, hey, it needs to manage all of these items? Like there needs to be what harms were there, what the criteria to be eligible, needs to fund a comprehensive initiative, and there needs to be a set of legislative protections and oversight to prevent abuse. Is that the framework in which you kind of started, where you got the essentials?
Absolutely. So the first thing is you have to define and describe what happened to us, what happened to our ancestors, right? So the harms is essential. You can't talk about any of this without talking about what happened to us. So that was the first thing we actually listed as a team. We all just thought through, okay, what are the things that we study? What are the things we've researched? Let's get some more research and figure out what happened to our people during those 89 years of slavery under the U.S. government, right? And then, which we get questions about all the time. I think from even before we had a foundation, the question on eligibility came up constantly, right? So who gets reparations? And to us, it seemed pretty simple, but to a lot of people, it was a little confusing. So I thought it was imperative to be able to define that for people clearly. And we have a table that we share in the booklet, so folks can easily access that to get that information. We can certainly talk through it here as well. And then the repair. So once you define the harm, once you notate and define who's eligible, you identify those folks, then what do you do to make amends, recompense for what happened to us, right? And what happened to our ancestors over that time period. So then we get to the repair part. At the repair, protections. And truthfully, throughout this whole process, and I'm talking and working with the policy team, in the back of my mind is always, how do we protect this wealth transfer once we get it, right? We understand that, you know, there will be scams, there will be people trying to every which way to take what we just earned back from us, right? By legal means and illegal means as well. So just making sure that we're protecting our people at every aspect, every point of this. We'll talk through, and you'll see that there's a protection for every single aspect of this plan, so that people aren't taken advantage of.
Yeah, you know, I think back to some of those conversations, and I remember one of the early conversations was around what time period. Like how,
Yes,
you know, because there were so many things that have occurred to American descendants of slavery. You know,
absolutely.
we have Jim Crow. We could keep going to present day. And then we have also slavery, this big thing, slavery, and what happened after. And so as I'm looking through this framework, I see it's broken up into phases. So the phases of repair, and I want to read what phase one says here. And Yvette, I'd love for you to kind of expound on the importance of this phase. Phase one focuses on the 89-year period of chattel slavery in the United States, from 1776 to 1865, as well as the 13-year Reconstruction period that followed. The year 1776 was chosen as a starting point because it marks the formal establishment of the United States of America as an independent nation with the adoption of the Declaration of Independence by the Continental Congress. From that moment forward, the newly formed United States had the sovereign authority to abolish slavery, yet instead the nation chose to perpetuate and expand the institution. So, Yvette, in hearing that in terms of phase one, why do you think that 89-year period plus the Reconstruction era is so important in how we talk about reparations?
Well, I've heard a lot of people say we have to start with Jim Crow, right? And no, you're missing the anchoring point, right? The slaves built America. There is no America without those slaves. Slaves started coming, our ancestors, before this was actually a country. So even when people say we immigrated here, no, we were here before this was actually a country to immigrate to, right? So the original sin is where you have to start. You can't start after that, because a lot of people want to start after that, want to include people who are not necessarily included because they're not descendants of slavery. So you have to start in slavery and say, this is our starting point. This anchors everything that we do. This is the beginning of this kind of atrocity, this multi-generational degradation, right? And accrued disadvantage. It starts right here. It doesn't start in Jim Crow. It doesn't start with mass incarceration. It starts with slavery. So I think you have to start with the starting point, right? And make it clear that this is American Descendants of Slavery, the institution. It's not. Even Jim Crow comes out of slavery. So you can say the American descendants of Jim Crow, the American descendants of mass incarceration, the mass descendants of convict leasing. No, all of that comes out of slavery. And if you miss that initial period that casts everything, that was like, that's it. That is the ball game. So you have to start there, and you have to begin there. Also, just to talk about what we did in this country, you have to start there, right? So I think we start there because that is the beginning. That is the beginning not only of slavery, that is the beginning of America.
Absolutely.
The beginning of America. That's at 1776. We can't get away from that. So a lot of folks, if you look in the lexicon of today, the name that we hear, or the year that most people hear, is 1619. So I really appreciate this differentiation with the start of America versus phase one dealing with pre-colonial times and so forth. No, we're dealing with the United States because that government is still in place.
Still here.
The same United States government is still in place. And it looks like from here, phase 2 and 3 address the legacies of slavery during the colonial era. And the harms resulting from policies such as Jim Crow segregation, redlining, urban renewal, removal, the federal government's role in the drug trade, mass incarceration, and other discriminatory practices that have disproportionately affected our community, the ADOS community. I really have an appreciation for the specificity, and I think, Yvette, this whole movement has been pushed in the concept of specificity. And so as I read through this framework, I see the specificity that really brought this movement forward, with the phases, and phase 1 being where we focused. On that note, when we talk about repair and during this phase, you talked a little bit earlier, Aisha, about the essentials of repair, and you started to get into really the administrative. So I want to list out what the 5 essentials of repair are, and then we're going to take them one by one. The 5 essentials of repair: you have administrative, education, land, mental health, and then you have financial, which includes patents and intellectual property as well. So let's start with that administrative. One of the things that, in our pre-meeting, we kind of talked about I was talking about our family trees, and I was talking about finding the slave recently as I was working through my family lineage and genealogy. Can you talk to us a little bit about the concept of safeguarding ADOS genealogy as one of the aspects of the administrative portion of our repair?
Oh, absolutely. It's significant. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to establish a Department of ADOS Affairs, or DAA. And what that would do is create a permanent executive agency to oversee and protect ADOS reparations, right? So again, we don't want to have a system where something is given to our people sort of like haphazardly or not in any kind of systemic way, and then people lose money or they don't get the proper credit for being an ADOS person because they weren't able to find any paperwork, the right paperwork and all that. We know for some people it can be challenging. Some people hit that 1870 wall and it can be a challenge. So we want to help take all of those barriers away. So the idea is for the DAA to partner with the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, the Census Bureau, and similar institutions to do research, organize, safeguard, and make ADOS genealogy records accessible. So the DAA will serve as a primary resource to do claim verification. So if you're an ADOS person or you believe to be an ADOS person, the DAA will assist you in finding out who your ancestors were, the connection to this lineage, that you don't have to do this on your own. And we want to ensure that these organizations and these institutions really, right, that they protect our information. So if you're a person, if you're a professor, if you're a genealogist, and you may have some records somewhere, we want to safeguard that stuff. So we want to be able to turn these things over, have electronic records. If it's a paperwork, have it copied somewhere and put it in the Library of Congress somewhere, so that we're able to access these records and people can actually find out how they're connected to this lineage if they don't already know.
Thank you for that. And in addition, the DAA, Department of ADOS Affairs, they're also going to do something in terms of financial protections and coursework for recipients. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Absolutely. So it's essential that every ADOS beneficiary fully understands what reparations entail, why it's a debt owed by the federal government, and the historical injustices that our ancestors endured during slavery in the Reconstruction period for phase one to begin with, right? So it's not just enough for the advocates like the ADOS reparations folks to be the ones to know what happened and why it's important. Everybody should know what's happening, not just even ADOS people, but everybody in America. If you're an American citizen, American resident, you should know this history. If you're a person who wants to immigrate to this country, you should know what happened to the people who are from this country. So what I have set up is just that if you are a person who wants to get reparations and you qualify for reparations, you have to have a history course. You have to know what happened to our people, right? And that's also, it's not just to ensure that you know what happened, but it also will give you a pride in what your people overcame. And it will help you, we hope, right, to be able to safeguard your wealth. So you won't be so quickly to just run out and fall for maybe a scam or to just like use it without thinking through, okay, this is something that my family, it was stolen from my family. This is something that my ancestors worked for and never got. So what can I do to ensure that this lasts for generations? That's the point of this, that it's not just something that you get one time and then it's out the door and one generation later. We want to ensure that you, your children, and your grandchildren can live well with this wealth, with this newfound wealth.
Mm-hmm. Now, you touched on something a little bit earlier, and I kind of want to jump into it now. So we talked about the administrative phase, or essential of repair, that's within phase one, and we use this word, and as we talked about it, but we didn't get deep. And I kind of want to go into this, and it's a big buzzword around the whole concept of ADOS, and that's eligibility. Eligibility. We saw on social media over the years, we've heard even, narratives like it doesn't matter, which stop the slave ship got on. It's just a stop, we're all the same people and all these things, even though everyone reminds us that we're not the same people all the time, right? So when we talk about the American Descendants of Slavery and reparations, and specifically reparations for ADOS, I remember the conversations around eligibility, and this was even a hot topic in our meetings,
Yes.
where we talked about eligibility. Like we were fighting, it got really contentious here because it was really important to everyone on the team that this is safeguarded, and we had to think of a million ways possible. Like, how could this be destroyed so we could make sure it was fortified? So, can you talk through the eligibility criteria? Who is eligible for reparations in the United States?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, this is an interesting topic. And to your point, it got very heated even amongst ADOS people, right? So, and I feel like because we want to get it right, everybody wants to get it right or as right as possible. We may have to do tweaks. We may have to come back and make things better. And even though once we share this booklet with folks publicly, we want to be able to, you guys can read through it. You let us know whether something doesn't make sense. If you have some research information on how to improve it, I'm open to hearing that as well. In fact, from the conference that Simeon mentioned we had in October, I got a lot of feedback. And the main thing people asked was, why is it so hard to find records on our people? What can we do to make this easier for people to find their family information? Because we know we've been here in this country. We know we haven't lived anywhere else. We didn't immigrate over here. We didn't come here later on. We came here in the beginning. So we want to ensure that folks know who gets it and who doesn't. So I'll just read really briefly who gets it, right? So for starters, you must be an American citizen and have identified as Negro, colored, Black, or African American throughout your life. You are barred if you have ever identified as anything other than Negro, colored, Black, or African American on any official government or work verification documents. In addition,
hold on, Aisha, you're right. But I just want to say one thing. This eliminates all the white passing conversation. What if somebody is white and they're white? No, they're not here. Continue. Sorry.
No, you're fine. Present a government issue ID, birth certificate, or census record that identifies a direct ancestor as Negro, colored, Black, or African American before 1965. And just to clarify, direct ancestor means someone who have a direct line to, so mother, father, grandparents, great grandparents, so not aunts, uncles, or cousins. Okay. And trace your ancestry to at least one person identified as Negro, colored, or Black and enslaved in the United States of America between 1776 and 1865. Or, and we have a third column, I'm not going to read everything in the third column, but you'll get that in the booklet. One of the things, though, that came up in the conference, people talked about that 1870, pre-1870 sort of like wall that they hit in trying to find their ancestors, because before then, enslaved folks weren't necessarily counted on the census. They weren't named. They may have been counted as just a number or age or for some kind of physical characteristic, right? So with that feedback I received, I updated it. So now we have identified one ancestor, one direct ancestor to the 1870 census record who was identified as Black or mulatto, right? And there are other things that you can choose from that third column in case the middle column, as far as finding someone who was enslaved during the 89 years of American slavery. If that's complicated, we have some other options.
So really, it's a three-prong test.
Yes.
Right. It's a three. So you have to actually meet on all of the three criteria. And the third portion, there's a couple of different documents that can serve for that.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Okay. So why three-prong? Why couldn't it just be Black is Black? Why couldn't it be, why couldn't it just be I have
all Black? What's the
I
problem?
have 4C hair too.
What kind?
Why couldn't it just be that?
Because that's not good enough, right? We are a specific group of people, and we descend from slaves. So the people who actually endured American chattel slavery and their descendants, who then had to deal with all of the repercussions and just the outcomes of being coming from an enslaved group of people, are the ones who actually suffered, right? So it's not good enough to just say because we have the same kind of hair texture or complexion, or we both like hip hop and R&B, that you automatically can have a piece of this this claim, right? No, that's not how that works. I personally would never assume that because of how I look that I can have a claim on someone else's ancestry.
You're not Haitian.
And
you don't have hate. You can't get
No.
anything from France because you have melanin. You can't do that.
I absolutely would never tell a Haitian that I deserve anything, any recompense because of what happened in Haiti. Nor will I tell a Jamaican that, nor will I tell someone who experienced colonialism in Africa or other parts of the world. So yeah, so this is a very specific claim. It's a very specific eligibility marker that we have here. And it's just, first of all, it makes sense.
You're saying that this is about lineage. So
yes.
Also, I went to the doctor. I had a sunburn on my back, and she said I'm melanin deficient. If you can trace your ancestry though to slavery, this being melanin deficient disqualify you if you have sharecroppers and slaves as your ancestors.
And you straight out sharecroppers, right? And those
not even grandparents, her parents.
Yeah.
So she's
like my mother was a sharecropper.
Yeah.
Like she remembers picking cotton. So like it's not about we get into this thing sometimes of, oh my God, you have white in you somewhere. Yes, that's obvious. It's also obvious to me that I also have sharecroppers and slaves in my lineage as well. And so I think sometimes we get caught up in the amount of melanin and kinky hair. I got the kinky hair. Stop right there. But sometimes we get caught up in you don't have enough melanin. And we lose that it's also about lineage and what that lineage ties to and what is the consequence of that lineage. And people miss that part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for those who are new to this conversation, pre-1965, the amount of Black people in the United States who did not descend from slavery was to the right of the decimal. So it was negligible altogether. It's to the less than 1%, significantly less than 1%.
The Smithsonian. We didn't make that up. That's from the Smithsonian, right?
And it's also from the book. I can't remember the name of the book, but I'll find with this also from the book. We can put a screenshot up there too. There was a great book who had it. I put the graphic up frequently. Yep.
Yeah, and that particular group, and when we were talking a little bit ago about phase one, and we're talking about harms, the people who are eligible for reparations are the people whose people experience these harms. So I want to read through some of the harms real quick, because I think part of what needs to happen is everyone needs to know what has happened to us. And so listen out these harms. Enslavement of African descended individuals and their progeny under U.S. law from 1776 to 1865. Over 89 years of forced uncompensated labor for the economic benefit of enslavers and the nation. Denial of the right to choose one's vocation or benefit economically from one's labor. Prohibition from filing patents or profiting from inventions due to lack of legal personhood. We weren't even considered people. Like
they just stole your IP. They're still living off the IP today, by the way.
Still living off of the IP. Widespread physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual abuse, which I love that one of the Essentials of Repair deals with the type, the things that we have to combat even mentally as some of this trauma gets passed down. Lack of bodily autonomy, including the systematic rape of enslaved women and men. Enslaved women forced to nurse their enslavers' children and to bear children solely to increase the enslaved population. Routine separation and sale of family members to serve the financial interest of enslavers. The American medical establishment was built in part on slavery. Enslaved individuals were subjected to invasive medical experimentation without consent and frequently without anesthesia. Their bodies, both living and deceased, were used in surgical trials and dissections to advance the field of medicine, often in settings as crude as slave cabins. Exclusion from the 1862 Homestead Act, which denied formerly enslaved people access to land grants. Failure of the U.S. federal government to protect or provide for freed persons after the Civil War. Reneging on federal government's promise of 40 acres during Reconstruction. abandonment of Reconstruction effort, allowing the rise of Jim Crow segregation. Jim Crow never had to happen, but it did. And legalized racial oppression through the Black codes. Basically, they made being Black criminal. Systematic land theft from Black Americans through legal and extra legal means. Widespread lynching and racial terrorism by white supremacist groups like the KKK. Still thriving groups here. You go out to Forsyth in Georgia, they still do a billboard every year. They still have recruitment efforts for the KKK.
We still have Confederate flags everywhere. That's the same thing.
That's right.
The country. Yeah.
That's right. The rebel flag. If you really
The
break
rebel
down
flag,
that's the rebel flag. That's the hey, I rock with you.
Yeah,
and
that's the
I
traitor
feel
flag.
for you.
You don't have the right name for it. It's the traitor flag.
Yeah, it's the traitor flag. Massacres of Black communities, whether you're talking about Wilmington, Camilla, LaFleur, Colfax, you name it, there are a bunch. And the exploitation through wage theft, sharecropping, and convict leasing systems. And this isn't even an exhaustive list. This is just some high points. What was it like putting this list together and talking through it? Because even speaking through it, like I hear my voice cracking. I hear like I feel something as I'm talking through that. What was it like putting that together?
Similar. I mean, I think everyone just as far as people in ADOS Advocacy Foundation, we are very well read on our history in this country. But when you put a list together like this to be able to share with people, to talk through these things with people who may not know, it's really emotional, to be quite frank. Everybody in the meeting, and we'll have moments of just quiet after someone talk through an issue or talk through one of these things that happen in history. Silence followed by anger, and then followed by a personal story, so some kind of familial relation to something that happened to someone. Someone's family had to leave the South to go north because of the KKK. Someone's family member was raped and ostracized because of that. I mean, just the issues that people talked about, their personal experience from this history, or even just losing land. People who had like just hundreds of acres of land they were able to establish post-slavery and then having it lost. So it was very emotional for everybody in the room or on the call. We were on Zoom calls back then. And it just really just crystallized that this wasn't just history. Like, it still impacts us today. It still has impacts, not just emotional, but financial impacts today on everyone in that room. So it's one of the things that actually is better, I think, to do in a group, because then we have that way to kind of be there for each other, talk through things. You're not kind of just home reading by yourself and getting angry, but you can like express how you're feeling and talk through those things. And then it also just crystallized just the connections that we just developed in this foundation, like just being able to share what happened to our families, to share this history
without shame.
Talk through this. Without shame, right? So that was a beautiful moment.
I can think of times where there'd be 5 or 6 of us on a Zoom call on Fridays until 8, 9 o'clock at night.
Many times.
Talking
it was later than that. It was later than that. We went into the AM sometimes.
We be going, and we start mid-afternoon.
1 o'clock.
One of the things that was just so prevalent was people's commitment to this task, or these series of tasks, and how we all grew closer as a result of it, to where we can fight and be cool. Like we had to grow closer because we were working together so close on these. Now, so we talked about that list of harms, and I purposely held that, even though I'd argue that it's in just the phases, it's the harms in the phases, but I held that right before we talk about the education component of the Essentials of Repair, because part of the educational component is incorporating ADOS history into education. Yvette, you've talked several times about how that history not being prevalent is part of the reason white America gets confused. It's part of the reason people can come to this country and act like they have no clue about what has occurred to us and wonder what's happening. So can you talk about the importance of everyone understanding ADOS history in America?
Well, omission is propaganda, basically. So when you omit us from the story and what we did, and not only built the country, how we paved the way for all the Black immigrants who are here, right? We paved the way for a lot of the most of the Asian immigrants who are here. So the Civil Rights Act did that for them. So if you omit that and have these people believe that, like, not only did we not do anything, but we are actually a contagion to wealth, we're actually a problem, we don't work hard, they don't understand that you would not be here were it not for us. You being here as a Haitian, Bahamian, a Jamaican, Nigerian, Ghanaian, Asian American, Chinese American, whatever you are, is because of the Civil Rights Movement, because the Immigration Act of 1965 came after the Civil Rights Movement. And that is because of what we did. But if you don't understand that, then what happens is you become ground to racist right-wing propaganda, which tells you these people, they don't work hard. That's why they're poor. They don't tell you that we're poor because of what this country did to us and what we fought for benefited you, and that's why you're in the country. They don't tell you that. They just tell you that these people are poor because of what they don't do. So part of what we have to do is that give them the education to understand who we are and how who we are and what we fought for benefited them.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I think about education. We have to make sure other people are educated, but we also have to firm up or shore up our own educational institutions. You know, I hear a lot of people give HBCUs flack, but the majority of our professionals come from HBCUs.
Absolutely.
The majority of our doctors, lawyers, everything comes from HBCUs. So one of the things I saw in the framework is that HBCUs must receive federal endowments large enough to ensure ADOS students can attend free of charge. Facilities are modernized and maintained, and educators are compensated on par with their colleagues at comparable institutions. So I think, okay, so I'm gonna pull out some HU flyness for you, Yvette. So all right. So when I think about my institution, Hampton University, or I think about your institution, Yvette, Howard University, we're talking about the top tier of HBCUs. And what that tells me is
one
that
HU is better than other HU, but go on, I'm sorry.
I was waiting for that. One is the real HHU, right?
Yeah, I don't know what
which one is the real one.
I just want to point out, even our background is pirate blue. But so we even got a pirate blue background, Hampton Pirates. Let's go. But you know, when I hear that at wanting educators compensated on par with their colleagues, when I think of top HBCUs, when I think of Hampton, when I think of Howard, when I think of Morehouse, when I think of Spelman, when I think of some of these top HBCUs, what I'm hearing is that their educators there should be compensated just like they would at Harvard or Cornell or at Princeton, at the places that have a track record of making strong Black leaders, strong Black employees, employers, business creators, doctors, lawyers, and so forth. So can you talk to us a little bit about the thought of HBCUs in this framework, Aisha?
Absolutely. You pretty much summed it up. I mean, to your point, these schools are the institutions that make Black professionals, right? I mean, so it just makes sense to continue to shore that up and ensure that they're getting equal access to funding so that our institutions can continue to prevail for the next 100 years, right? And also so that we can ensure that our students and more ADOS students are going to these schools. And even even to this day, you'll hear ADOS kids say they would love to go to HBCU, but they just can't afford it. Right?
To. Yep.
Yeah, and it's just not fair to just saddle some young person with like thousands and thousands of dollars of debt, and sometimes into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So, the idea here is ensure that ADOS students, if they want to, they can go to an HBCU, right? To ensure that these schools get the funding that they need so that they can pay their administrators, update their facilities, and just be successful. But also, so what we often hear when people talk about reparations is that there's so much research that needs to be done. Research needs to be done. And okay, maybe there is some. I think there's lots of, from what I've read, and I read a lot of it, there's a
There's
lot
a
of
lot of
information
info
already out
already
there.
there.
There's a lot of studies already out there. There's a lot of data already out there about our outcomes and the impact and the money that was lost and basically taken off the table, if not land stolen, right? Which ends up being worth money. So if there's research that needs to be done, we need to have the institutions, our own, that can do that research, right? We need to be able to have the grants so that researchers can work at the institution and do the high levels of research that's required to be able to even strengthen this case for reparations.
Yeah, something I love about this section is it dealt with our institutions. It dealt with our students, our learners as well. And it didn't just require our institutions. So you also have in there that ADOS who do not attend HBCUs must receive vouchers to attend public colleges and universities free of charge.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you shouldn't have to go to a Black college to
Right.
get the education that we deserve here in
Right.
America, because I believe that this reparations framework puts us as first-class citizens in this country. So
Absolutely.
that, I believe, with that first-class citizenship comes choice. And part of that choice is we should be able to go where we want. And if it's a state and public college or university, there shouldn't be a cost there.
Shouldn't be a cost, right. The money should not be preventing us from getting the education to be able to have the jobs of tomorrow and today, right? We shouldn't be, worried about folks being unemployed and folks being employed because they don't have certain skills. So, we have all these institutions. We need our students attending them just like everybody else.
Absolutely. So we've talked about administrative, we've talked about education, and then these are just overviews.
Yeah.
When you all actually get to see this framework, you'll see how vast and extensive the information in these sections are, but these are just overviews. And I know everyone's waiting on us to get to the money. We're not there yet. I know it. We're saving it to the last portion of today. So we're going to talk about land now. And the Critical Mass podcast, we did an episode on eminent domain. We talked about all of the land loss that we've seen throughout our history here in America, especially land loss we've seen post-Reconstruction. If you look on our agricultural agenda, with the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, the Black Agenda, the agricultural section, it talks about how much land we've lost. And in some cases, the size of Central Park daily for a certain period of time. And so land, I don't think we can talk about reparations without talking about land. And I know a lot of people, you'll hear the 40 acres and a mule. And what I love about this whole framework is it basically breaks out that if you have the 40 acres and a mule and don't have anything else in today's society, it's not enough. So we do talk about the 40. Yeah, we do talk about the 40 acres are the need for land. So can you talk to us about in there, it talks about an ADOS land trust and management of that trust. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So as you guys know, but for our audience, in case they don't know, you mentioned 40 acres. So General William Sherman Special Field Order number 15 is what created the 40 acres. So what was supposed to happen, what was promised is that 40 acres of tillable ground would go to newly freed families. And at that time, families were understood to be around 4 people. So the 40 acres would amount to about 10 acres per household member. So one of the first things I did was to kind of go through some old agricultural data to figure out what was that land worth back in 1865, right? And so 1 acre on average of farmland and buildings in the United States in 1865 was worth $17 an acre, okay? So if you multiply $17 times 40 million acres is $680 million, okay? So that's in money from 1865. So if we bring that up to present day, and if we use, let's say, 6% annual interest, that will be at $6.3 trillion in 2022. Okay. This is a lot of money that we weren't able to accrue through not getting the 40 acres. But in addition
this
to
is
that,
just land, though, right? This is just land. So
This
we're
is
talking
just
about
land.
$6.3 trillion in 2022 dollars in just land alone.
Just land. Yep. And that's just for 40 acres of land, okay? So if we then talk about the Homestead Act of 1862, where mostly white Americans and European immigrants were allowed up to 160 acres of land for as little as a filing fee, using that same $17 an acre, and as of 2022, if we were able to get that, they'll be worth $121 trillion.
And that's at 6%. And
That's
6%
at 6%.
was a standard percentage rate during that time. I was reading, and I won't go too far on this because it's more on the financial side, but the slaves that were traded or sold to create Georgetown were sold at a 6% interest rate.
Yes.
So
that
that 6% is very standard. So that $121 trillion, ooh.
It's a lot of money. And we also know that the number of adult descendants of the original Homestead Act living in the year 2000 was estimated to be around 46 million people. So about a quarter of the adult U.S. population, of obviously that would be mostly white Americans, can trace their legacy of wealth and property ownership to one single government program, the Homestead Act. One government program they can trace their wealth to. Changes that is life changing. And our condition, our position in this country would just be so much better. Like, I don't even think we could fully even understand or comprehend. Yeah, it's just where we should be and where we could be still in the future if we get the reparations that we're owed. So the idea is, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the idea is to have an ADOS land trust to deal with all of this funds that we did not get from owning about 200 acres of land, right? So it will be held and operated by the DAA, the Department of ADOS Affairs, with oversight and input from a community board, inclusive of members from the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. And we want it to be a combination of real estate, community land, conservation land as well. And the trust, the real estate will be diversified. We will invest in apartment buildings, hospitals, hotels, etc. The land has to be quality, free of toxicity, unencumbered, right? And a person, ADOS person who has gone through the process, gone through the trainings and the protections and the history training on why we deserve reparations, all the things to qualify and be over the age of 25, they would then receive monthly dividends from this land trust, right? So we're asking that the DAA would hire land assessors, wealth advisors, soil experts to test the soil to make sure that the land that we get and that's, in the trust is, like, again, viable and it's eventually profitable. So we also want to have an opportunity for people to also live on the land. So if you're a person that you just want communal living, you may just like the congregate settings. We want to be able to build on that land, have homes on that land, multifamily housing, if you will. But also we know there's a segment of our population that cannot live independently, right? So you have people who need more services. And, I live in Washington, D.C. Just today, you really can't walk down the street without seeing people who are experiencing homelessness, who are experiencing mental illnesses, and a lot of them are our folks, right? So we want to be able to have a safe space for them as well. So this is a part of that package.
Look out, the mute monster almost got me. I love that this even talked about it being quality land, free from toxicity, because we know the history of America. They'll throw us on some lead land real quick, okay?
Real quick. You get that tomorrow.
Everywhere.
Or some land that's sinking. You be in the bayou.
Yeah, telling us we can go to the American equivalent of Chernobyl.
Right.
This is all yours.
This is just yours.
All of it.
Go. So I love this section, and Land ownership is really important to me. I've dealt with land loss, as I've talked about. Our family dealt with land loss, as we talked about in the previous episode. Um, I love I love 20% of land allocation funds must be set aside for ADOS individuals who wish to purchase land for personal or business use, and that there are protections there. So we've talked about administrative, we've talked about education, we've talked about land, uh, and we talked a little bit about some of the harms, which, if you ask me, gets us into this next section, which is around our mental health and the effects of slavery and the compounded effects of racism that affect our mental health and the trauma that really gets passed down and alters our genetic code, and the impacts of that. So, um, you talk about in this section the the physiological and emotional injuries that have taken a multi-generational toll on mental health, and you even use the term RES, the residual effects of slavery. Can you talk a little bit about this section and the purpose of this section, and why we have it, and why it must be included when we're talking about the essentials of repair?
Absolutely. So, in your introduction, Simeon, when you were going over my bio a bit, you spoke to the fact that I worked in homeless shelters in New York City. And the first of which I worked in was a mentally ill and chemically addicted shelter, MICA, for women. And what I didn't know was how poverty and is a risk factor for everything. Okay. So just not having money is a risk factor for everything. It's a risk factor for HIV. It's a risk factor for homelessness. It's a risk factor for obesity. It's a risk factor for everything. Right. And when you're of our lineage, you know that what the data always says, we're at the higher rates of everything. Right. If anything is bad in the world, ADOS got it. Right. And, and that's true for homelessness as well. So some of the women at this particular shelter, I realized, it wasn't just because they were homeless that they were experiencing issues. It was because of being ADOS. It was because of that history of neglect, the history, and not just neglect. I'm not talking about familial neglect. I'm talking about from your government, right? Our government hasn't been there, hasn't done play the role that they should play in ensuring that people are emotionally and mentally stable and capable of living productive, full lives. So one of the most heartbreaking things in that experience is realizing that some people will just never be able to live a normal, I put that in quotes, life because of their mental illnesses. And when it comes to our people, we lack insurance, the proper insurance to have like really, at the shelter, people will get seen by a doctor for maybe 10 minutes every blue moon, particularly just to do a psychosocial so they could get housing in a structured environment, right? And that's just like a short thing. It's not a long-term, ongoing, real sort of like relationship with the doctor to get you stable and be able to function in this world. So it's just putting a band-aid on such a large problem. So I wanted to ensure that those people who have extreme mental health disorders, but also those of us who are maybe on like the other end of that spectrum, and particularly coming through our lineage and experience what we've experienced, has the opportunity to get seen appropriately so we can deal with the issues that come up just from, like you were saying, not just from racism, but also lineage therapy as well, right? So that component is in there, and we want to ensure that we have Black social workers who are trained in this, and not just trained in like mental health issues, but trained in lineage-based therapy. So ensure that our particular issues that are really, specific to being American, right, and being American descendant of slavery, that all that is considered, that is understood, and then there's therapy and treatment plans that are developed with that in mind.
I don't think people understand the mental impacts of racism in a real way. I was having a conversation with someone about the impacts on Black Americans, their mental health with underemployment.
Mm.
How underemployment alone can affect how you see your worth in the marketplace. how you
Absolutely.
see
Your
your
worth in
abilities.
your family as well, right?
And the
Everything.
financial. And so
Mhm.
what, I think of a moment of that when you were talking about and me and my wife talk about this particular moment. It was on one of your shows, and you talked about how we're taking ownership of all that failure.
Mm,
And
Mhm.
how if you don't have the issue pointed in the right direction, next thing you know, it's all your fault versus what has occurred to us in these documented incidences of racism and heinous activity towards our community, us being locked out of the job market, us being locked out of farming, us being locked out of all of these different areas. And we're watching the switch up happen with AI right now,
yes,
uh,
sir.
where
Mhm.
where a new lockout is occurring, and the impact on our mental health kind of lays in the balance. So I really appreciate this section. I appreciate the fact that the foundation considered it and put it as an essential of repair.
And let me just say one thing to me really quickly. I have, after that show and a few shows where I said like, hey, this isn't true. This is something that is intentional, that is geared to harm you. It's not your particular failure. After that, I got a number of emails from ADOS people who were saying I was considering suicide,
Mm,
right?
Mhm.
Like I was going to take my own life because I thought I had failed myself, my family, my spouse, my kids, and I thought they would be better off without me. Right.
Mm.
So when we talk about that, we're talking about also saving the lives of ADOS people who have unwittingly bought into this propaganda that says that they are the problem.
Right.
mm. And I think about old stories that I've heard from ADOS families, mine and other families, where you might have had a suicide. And I think about statements like, I didn't think I added any value.
Mm.
I think about Black men specifically, and how we have the highest unemployment, and the feeling of value that comes from being able to take care of your family,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
feeling of value that comes from the community seeing your value, and how the effects of that not being the case, how that has us in mental shambles a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think it affects our ability to volunteer. It affects our ability to work with one another. It affects our ability to even have the perspective needed for our own change management in our life. And so I love that this section is here. Can we talk about the money?
Always on
Yeah,
the
can we
money.
talk about the
Always on the
money here?
money.
Yes, sir.
So I held this section to the end on purpose, because everyone starts with the money. And I
Yeah.
think it was important to understand that the ADOS Advocacy Foundation's framework is money plus. It's
Yes.
money plus land, money plus protections, money plus education, money plus mental health.
Yeah.
It is all of the things. And so we didn't take a either or model, we took a plus and model, because the overall concept is these are the essentials of repair. These are the five essentials of repair. So ADOS Advocacy Foundation and members of the ADOS movement as a whole have been known to say $20 trillion is the down payment.
Yes.
And I think we've already made the case just in land alone. We talked about how that land, if we look at it at a 6% interest, we're already at the $120 trillion. So we're talking about a $20 trillion down payment. Can we talk about that? Like
Yes.
how
Where'd that come from?
yeah, how did we get to the monies?
To the monies, yes. So that all comes from estimating the cost of slavery, right? So that physical labor component. So Dr. David H. Swinton, he's a PhD in economics from Harvard University, previously a president of Benedict College. So Dr. Swinton in 1990 developed a formula for estimating the cost of slavery. And that formula consists of four components. The first one being value of labor expropriated, Second component, value of lost opportunities to acquire capital. Third, value of lost freedom. And fourth, pain and suffering. Okay. And in 2015, Dr. Thomas Kramer, PhD from UConn, expounded on the expropriated labor component with his wage-based estimation calculation. And he's the person that came up with the calculator, essentially. And we actually were able to get access to that as an org and to review that table. And even in his words, he noted that it was very elementary. So he said this didn't even go as far as it probably should go, but he just wanted to start with something, right? And we agree this is a pretty good start. And so that's where that $20 trillion comes from. So he starts in 1776 and it goes through 1861 and then there's a pause between 1861 and 1865 because, as you all know, that's when the Civil War took place. And just with people moving around, fighting in the war, it was just harder to accurately track income, what the income would have been, the numbers, and just all that jazz. But you should also note that his calculation is considered conservative at a 3% interest rate, which we talked about a little earlier. The going rate at that time, with an example with Georgetown University, was 6%. So his estimate is based on 3%. And again, we're excluding 1861 and 1865. So 1776 through 1861 are the years that he did the calculation for. And the hours are billable on a 24 hours per day basis because an enslaved person didn't own their own time, right? So they were basically on call at any point that a master or someone in charge wanted them to do something, they had to get up and do it. So it's based on 24 hours. And that's how he came up with that calculation. And at the ADOS Advocacy Foundation, we agree with that methodology. As I said earlier, if people have the expertise, they have their own calculation that they work through and they want to share that with us, email me. We're happy to hear it. Email Yvette, email the org. We're happy to improve this plan, but we think this is a really valuable and viable first step. So that's where that comes from. And that is literally just a down payment. And that's just one component of it. So that's just the value of labor expropriation. That's just your work, your labor. So what that would have been per hour for a white man, what he would have earned during that time, that number was just kind of correlated to the enslaved population, everybody was enslaved during a certain year, and what that would be. So, and that was, again, in 2022 dollars. We're in 2025 now. That number,
we got that inflation popping. We got that inflation popping.
Okay. So that number has certainly gone up, but again, we feel that is a valuable and viable starting point. So what would that look like for people? Because I'm sure that'll be your next question, Simeon.
It is. You're right.
How do I get mine?
Yeah. What does that look like?
Good question. Important question. So this is our plan looks like this. Using the 2022 value at $20 trillion, each ADOS person at that time would have gotten $500,000. Okay. But there are stipulations again. So one thing I want to share, I'm not sure if I explained this clearly earlier, is that one of the guiding themes or guiding principles that I was working with throughout this whole thing is protecting this wealth, protecting ADOS, right? Not putting us out there to be taken advantage of, to just kind of get the money and lose the money. So there are a ton of guardrails within this plan. I'm not going to list out everything. If you want to get the booklet, you will be able to do soon, and you can read through that. But that's the guiding principle. So how do we guard this? One of the things is that for eligibility, you have to be 25 or older to receive the funds. We're not saying everybody over 25 has all the best ideas, but we do think there is a baseline of certain like wisdom, experience that has to come before you can get something. But if you're under 25, that money will be in a trust managed by the DAA, Department of ADOS Affairs. Unless you're enrolled in college and you need tuition assistance, absolutely you should be able to access that for tuition. If you're suffering from homelessness, you should be able to access that for housing. But and you heard the other components of this framework, if those other components are actionable and they're in process, then the school tuition should be covered already and the housing should be covered already. But if it's not, if this is given out incrementally in terms of like, financial first, then that will come later. But anyhow, we have those protections in there so that if you're under 25, you can access that money. Another thing, each beneficiary must purchase a life insurance policy with death benefits for your heirs. It's really important that once we have wealth, that we get into the process of protecting it and protecting our heirs, our children, essentially, right?
Real quick, I want to jump in here because I think a lot of people make being a financial guru a barrier to reparations. And they almost act like you need to be damn Dave Ramsey in order to qualify for reparations first, right? And so I love this because it meets people where they are. Absolutely. And it helps build those components of the financial responsibility needed to protect this inheritance, basically.
Well, and to your point, Simeon, most rich people aren't good at managing like wealth.
They
have wealth managers.
Yes, this idea that like you all can't get this thing that you're owed because you're not good at managing wealth is just insane. Because the truth of the matter is that most people who have wealth just have wealth managers who they trust. That's it. Right. And they'll manage into generations, not just this one generation. They will manage to tell you about what your kids and grandkids, and they'll manage this 200 years. So, I think this kind of takes away that propaganda too that people have around. Well, you don't know how to manage money. Well, yeah, we ain't never had none, but we can figure this out.
Right. Once we get it, we got some people in place to help us figure it out, right? And so part of what what the DAA will hire will be accountants, economists, wealth managers, financial planners. So we're going to have all these sorts of people engaged in this process, attorneys as well, to ensure that it's done properly, right? And that it's done for generations, not just for now. Some other things, each beneficiary must work with an estate attorney to create a will and live in revocable trust. This will be provided free of charge from the DAA. State and local governments cannot place liens on reparations amount accounts for pre-award debts. So if they get some debts post reparations, go do what you got to do. But anything before that, when we were, going through struggles, people are going through life, and right, that's kind of off the table in terms of of putting liens on folks' accounts. And so some of the guardrails is to, like I said, to protect this money. It's critical to prevent the rapid loss of principal through uninformed financial decisions, high-risk investments, scams, or wasteful spending by people who may not have access to financial literary resources. A long-term distribution model is designed to provide beneficiaries with time to acquire essential knowledge about personal finance, wealth management, and investment strategies, right? And more importantly, these guardrails are intended to preserve and transfer wealth across generations. And for folks who, just want to take advantage of people, this is really to protect all of us, really. So there will be people in place, and there will be hotlines you can call if you think someone's trying to scam you, or someone told you about some great business deal and you don't really know if it's a good deal. You'll be able to call up to kind of get some guidance on ensuring that it's a solid plan, so you're not taken advantage of. So all that,
it's in the same way that the NFL did when they saw a lot of plans coming down, potential plans coming down the pipe that they kind of understood may or look like they might be scams. We have the same kind of warnings. Hey, no, don't do this. This is somebody who is designing this to take advantage of the money that you just got.
Yep.
I love that.
And they will. I mean, just know that. Know that if once people hear and they know this is coming to you or coming to us, they will have all kinds of scams and plans. It's going to sound great, look great, be nice and shiny, and it's going to be to your detriment, right? So we want to make sure that there's a way to prevent. We won't be able to prevent everything, obviously, but to the best of our abilities. Yeah.
I love that there's protections in there, and we'll talk about some more of the protections. There's this other, I remember as we were developing this framework, we got into patents. We got into patents. We got into intellectual property, because one thing, as you start to learn and understand ADOS history, we've always had inventors.
Yes.
We've always had people who were a step ahead of the rest. We've always had people who created things that made life easier. Even you even had slaves creating things that made their role in slavery less horrible. It's still
Yes.
horrible. But we were able to build ingenuity out of this troublesome time that we found ourselves in here in the United States. So when we talk about finances, and we talk about the financial component of repair, we have to also talk about intellectual property and patents. So, can you talk to us about the need to address intellectual property in a reparations framework?
Sure. Happy to. Some folks, I'm sure, have heard of the Dred Scott Supreme Court case, right? So the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dred Scott, 1857, declared that free Black Americans were not citizens of the United States. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Patent Office issued a memo titled Invention of a Slave, stating that a new and useful machine invented by a slave cannot be patented. And as Simeon just explained, we were always inventing things. We were always being creative, even under the most heinous and horrible conditions. We were still thinking, being, and it just kind of a sidebar, but just to think about the amount of intellectual property that was just stolen and other folks were able to benefit off of and still eat off of to this day. It's sad. It's really sad. So what we want to do here is help to bring ADOS people into a position of not just creativity, but of ownership, and ensuring that things that we developed, that it's being protected, and that we have the skills and the systems around us to be able to help us kind of just be as creative as we can be as inventive as we can be, and then to protect our inventions. So Olivia Constance Bethia explains it this way. If African Americans comprise around 14% of the U.S. population, but account for only 2% of current patent awards, and the value of the U.S. patent system is $8 trillion, then the budget for a proper reparations package would include $960 billion. That's just to get us on par with our population numbers. Equity, okay? That's what that's talking about. So
And that's just patents. That
that's
that
just
is
patents.
just intellectual property.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So in you all's calculation, in the foundation's calculation, this concept of this 960 billion was injected into that down payment, correct?
No, this
Oh,
is completely
oh,
separate.
so
This is completely
this is
separate.
even more. Oh,
This is
let me let me clutch the pearls.
clutch the pearls.
This
No,
is
that the
completely
down
separate.
payment, just to be clear, the down payment is just for that physical labor,
Just the labor.
day-to-day work. That's just what that is. Okay. This whole second segment of patents is just people being just brilliant, right? And making and creating brilliant things, but not being able to actually, get the money or the credit for doing that thing. And now if we look at our population today being about 14%, but we're only 2% of the patent industry. And we know we were always creating things. So if we're going to be, think of things being equitable and just like making this right, we'll bring that up to 14% of patents as well. And so with those numbers, it would be $960 billion is what our share of the larger patent industry would be.
Mm. Hey, I can't help but think, Ezra. I mean, when we think about racism, they use it's used as a term to define hate. But what we dealt with was complete domination. Was complete domination where, and I appreciated from the harms. We talked about the lack of body autonomy. We talked about the inability to preserve our inventions or to profit from those inventions, the inability to keep a family together.
Yes.
The inability to grow from our labor and profit from that labor. I just hear complete domination, and what I hear from this framework is what it looks like to break that up. to
Yes.
break that domination up and bring us to our rightful place in American society. There are no Americans more American than the American descendants of slavery. We are the Americans that the standard of greatness should be measured next to. Can we talk about protections? We've talked about the money, and y'all, for those that are listening, there's a lot here around the money. I mean, they even talk about licensing fees being paid amongst graduation for different types of trades. They talk about job placement and the need for job placement. We talk about education tailored to meet current needs of future labor. I mean, this is such a robust framework. And so we're looking forward to being able to share it where people can actually read through it themselves. But I want to talk about these protections.
Sure.
And because we know that they will put together a system that defunds everything that they fund if we don't think about it front end. We've seen it. We saw in Tulsa and other places, hey, build a Wall Street, they'll destroy it. They'll fire it. They'll destroy all of the people and then deny justice to living victims, right? Like, so we know that protections are important. And so one of the protections that is talked about is preserving and publicizing ADOS history.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? When I think ADOS history, one of the things that comes up is the preservation of like slave narratives.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
preservation of those. Talk a little bit about the need for that preservation.
Absolutely. And you're right on point with that. So one of the first things, like we mentioned before, people want to know, am I eligible, right? And how will they find out if they're eligible or not? So we do want to preserve the history here. So some of the documents that we're referring to is transatlantic voyage records, slave trading manifests, photographs and videos from that time period, auto recordings, journals and bills of sale, insurance policies and wills, land titles and deeds, sharecropping and convict leasing records, census data, freedom papers, probate records, and birth certificates where available, church and baptismal records as well where available. So we would ask the Congress to pass legislation to protect these historical documents that are vital to ADOS to confirm the eligibility, right? In addition to that, just having a public awareness campaign so that people in the community, like, you don't know what you might have in your attic or your basement, right? And not just ADOS people, but other Americans in this country as well. If you have something that you haven't shared or you haven't gone through some old paperwork and and it may have some information that's valuable to a family out there somewhere that can tell like where their people may be from, may have come from, may have experience, be it convict leasing, be it sharecropping, whatever. We would want you to bring those documents forward and be able to protect that document, to document that history, put it in the historical record.
Now, I also saw under protections that the DAA would have investigative and enforcement powers to shield us from scams.
Yes.
So
It's isn't it so crazy? This is like, it has to be like top of the line, top of the list. It's just so important because, as I mentioned earlier, people are going to come with the scams. They're going to come with sort of stuff we haven't even seen yet. Okay. There would be inventing new ways, probably using AI, right? To be able to figure out a way to how to get that money out of your bank account and put it in their
It's
own.
going to get more complicated. It's not going to be just like, I'm the prince of Zamia. It's going to be like, I have money for you and I want to transfer back.
Right. Like, here's your reparations check. All you have to do is put in your account number and then they
transfer me some. Like, transfer me. You got extra. Transfer me some.
So basically, now I ain't gonna say no names, but basically, you can't have someone create some bull crap real estate investment and later become a preacher after painting a commercial building black and running up energy costs. Right? Is that what we're?
I would say yes.
All right.
That sounds about right. That sounds about right.
And,
yeah.
And these same people talk about the Lord's London in relation to reparations. So they we won't have to give up grit money.
No grit money. We can eat our grits.
Okay. We can eat our grits. Which I heard some folks on X Twitter, because I don't call it X. I heard some folks on Twitter talking about they ain't like grits, but then they went to a non-ADOS place to get them. But anyway, we'll keep. I digress. Let's get back on some of these projections and saving the grit money.
My brother, we gotta protect the grits too. I gotta add that. Protect the grits.
Protect that grit money
at all costs. At all costs.
And I think this part is really important because when we talk about key documents and public service announcements or awareness campaigns, we're in the middle of an environment where our stuff is getting moved out of museums right now.
Yes.
Where this history that details what has occurred to us in America and sets the stage for what will make us whole are getting removed. So I really have a high appreciation for these records, them being preserved. And you also talk about them being easily accessible.
Yes.
For us. And so I another part I saw was offer incentives to documentarians, researchers, historians, and journalists who have interviewed survivors of these traumas to share their recordings and footage for the enrichment of our national memory.
Absolutely. If they haven't done it yet, we would definitely want even the DAA to reach out to folks to assure people like, hey, we want this information. It's valuable. Bring it in. So we wanted that information to go as far and wide as possible.
I love this. So what we've gone over today, I just want to lay it out. We talked about how we developed this reparations framework and it being in collaboration with a lot of minds in a room working together over a period of months and an extended period of time. We talked about the overall phases to repair. So the fundamentals of reparations of a framework, including identifying the harm suffered, defining eligibility criteria, funding a comprehensive repair initiative, and having a robust set of legislative protections and oversight. We talked about the phases, which being phase one, which was from 1776 to 1877. So that was all of the founding of the country, slavery from the founding of the country to emancipation and Reconstruction. As the types of repair or the phase of this aspect of repair. We talked about eligibility and having a three-prong eligibility for reparations. We talked about the essentials of repair, which are broken up into administrative. So like the creation of a Department of ADOS Affairs, ensuring that our history is safeguarded. We talked about education, ensuring that our HBCUs are funded, ensuring that our ADOS learners have the ability to go to school without being riddled in debt, ensuring that people who immigrate to this country get the education about our contributions. We talked about land and the restoration of land for ADOS and how that has impacted us financially and how that land comes to $6.3 trillion alone when we're talking about the loss. We talked about mental health and the effects of slavery, Jim Crow, and America's history of oppression of ADOS and how that has to be addressed. And then we talked about financial, that $20 trillion down payment. We talked about patents, and we talked about protection of this whole package. Did I leave anything off in my summary there about, I tried to pull it all together.
I think you did.
You did a good job.
You did well. You did very well. Yes, very well. It is. It's a lot of stuff in there. So it's a lot to go through, but you did great.
Well, I love this, and I love that this is going to be made public, available for the public, because I don't think it's just ADOS who needs to understand what this looks like. I think it's everyday Americans need to understand what this looks like. Another thing I just want to point out that we didn't mention here is on the ADOS Foundation, ADOS Advocacy Foundation's page, we have reparation frequently asked questions, where it will arm you with a lot of the information you need to deal with some of the frequently asked questions around reparations. And it talks about a lot of the whys and the who and the how. And our framework takes that to a whole nother level by providing a lot of the detail around ADOS reparations. Yvette, now that we're here, now that after this broadcast and after our conference in October, more people know about this reparations framework or will know about it and will understand what reparations looks like. Why do you think more people should join in on this fight?
Well, I think, this is a moment. You don't get a lot of moments in your lifetime. People don't understand how fast a lifetime goes by. You don't get a lot of moments. This is a moment where you can really have that debt paid. We have the framework. We've made the argument in terms of agency, in terms of going to zero wealth. We've done all of that. And so now we're here. And even in terms of our white people in the community, right? And our quote unquote people of color, although I don't like that term for anybody because I think it erases all lineage. I think you have to ask yourself, are you ready to move beyond, kind of protesting to power? Right? We talk about racial grievance, and this is a way to get beyond that. So if you want to talk about progress in this country, if you want to move beyond certain types of grievances and angst, this is a real way that we come together as a country. And if you don't want to see this stuff anymore, if you come to America, I hate what happens, it's so racial, it's so this. Well, here's the fix. Right. And this is how we move beyond that to really trying to be one America where we're not so caught up on ethnicity. Part of the reason we're caught up on lineage now is because our lineage was not repaired. So if we get to a point where we're repaired, we can really move forward and have that kind of reconciliation that people behave as if they want. So I think this is a point to become that kind of one America that Obama talked about that wasn't real. He said, there's not one red America, blue America, there's one America. No, Obama, it wasn't. But I think we are in a place where we can say, okay, now we can do that. We can move to that.
And so I can't stress it enough that you have the ability to get involved. And you can do that by going to joinados.com. I also want to give a huge shout out to all of the volunteers across the country who made this possible, who made these moments possible, whether it be our Black agenda, whether it be our outreach campaigns like Claim the Name, whether it be our media campaigns and our social media, are people who are helping chapters get lit up across the country, are those brave individuals who have decided to lead a chapter and have taken on that extra responsibility in our community. For all of the people part of the training team to help some of these trainings, we have a whole series of training that's coming out over this summer. Just a big shout out to all of those individuals who have decided that justice for our people is worth their time, worth their energy, worth their intellectual abilities, and have put that together. Our members range in profession, from blue collar to white collar to education to C-suite. We have people all around who are willing to make a difference. I also want to give you a shout out, Aisha. One, I was so excited about this episode because I know all of the hard work that got put into creating this framework, and just give you some flowers today, just like the flowers in your background, which are really pretty.
I knew he wasn't going to get to an episode without you saying some mess. I knew it.
The flowers in your background. Did you take that picture? It feels like a picture that you would have taken.
I did take this picture.
I knew it.
You were right.
I knew it. But I want to give you some flowers there and just all of your dedicated hard work as a volunteer and a high-level volunteer who is knocking out deliverables left and right. And very, very last, YC. I love that you came through and committed to being here for our community in the way that you have, leading such an important organization as the ADOS Advocacy Foundation. Again, those who want to get involved, you can get involved at adosfoundation.org. You can join at joinados.com. I am Simeon with the Critical Mass Podcast. Thank you all for joining for our reparations episode where we reviewed the ADOS Advocacy Foundation's reparation framework. You all have a wonderful rest of your day.